Welcome back, Classic NBA Podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
How's it going, Jason?
Pretty good. So we are in the midst of what seems like an extremely close MVP race right now. We got James Harden, we got Russell Westbrook breaking triple-double records or threatening to do so. We got LeBron James, who's always pretty awesome, and we've got Kawhi Leonard. You know, maybe maybe you have another favorite dark horse candidate on the season, but I think those are the implied for the moment. But we feel like there is not a definitive MVP this season, and it made us think, okay, let's look at some of the other seasons in which the MVP votes were extremely close, and look at whether we think they made good decisions and some interesting stuff about that. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, because there's been in recent years, of course, unanimous MVP last year, it's Steph Curry, and it was pretty much like I don't think anybody could reasonably argue for many other people other than Steph Curry last year, and really even the year before that. I mean, he was pretty much the best argument. You can make a few arguments, for like a LeBron James or whatnot, but
yeah, Harden was good 2 years ago too.
Yeah,
but
that's right. Yeah, I forgot about Harden that year too. But it felt like Steph Curry, when it was all said and done, it was like, yeah, that's fine. I think that'll work for us. So it's been a while since we've had one of those, but this year is legitimately I've heard many different arguments for all four of the guys, and particularly Westbrook, Harden, and Kawhi Leonard. As of late, you kind of hear the most about those guys, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I've heard them, and I believe almost every single one, and I even waver on it a little bit too. One day I'll be like, no, it's definitely this guy, and the next day I'm like, I don't know, and then Kawhi has his game, so it might go down to that last week and guys trading off great games or whatever, or it might just come down to how the West plays out a little bit. But yeah, it looks like, I mean, by my money, it's probably going to be one of those three. The Westbrook, Harden, and Kawhi, because I think there's some fatigue with LeBron James, and he's kind of the easy pick or whatever. We'll talk about certain, close MVP races where I think that plays a big part, where it's a guy that probably should win, or a guy who has every right to win, but just doesn't win because of, there's this fatigue factor that kind of comes in with MVP voting. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But yeah, it's fascinating. It's really cool. I mean, it makes something really fun about the last few weeks or the last month or so of the NBA season, because it is wide open. Any of those guys could win it.
Yeah, and for LeBron, I do think that because it's been 3 years since he's won it, because Durant won it the year before Curry, and then Curry said the two. So there's a story of everything they did for the finals. There might be some momentum behind giving it to him one last time, because it's probably the last legit chance that at his age that he would win it. Although you never know. I mean, he's so tremendous, he might be an MVP candidate for another 5 years or so. But it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, there's a lot of different stories that could be told there, and we'll get into that a little bit as we talk about our MVP races. But we're going to start with 1958. Bill Russell in his second season, his first full season, because his first season he actually, about a third of it, he didn't play because he was playing in the Olympics. He beat Dolph Schayes by 30 points. And it was only the third year that the NBA had an MVP, and the players actually voted for MVP at this time. This was until the 1981 season that changed. And my understanding is they were not allowed to vote for their teammates. So there are not, there's no opportunity, obviously, for a unanimous MVP. Although, most of the races really, there weren't a whole lot of close ones. I mean, we're going to look at here that, it's relatively rare for there to be super close MVP races. But this was definitely, the first one that could make that claim.
Absolutely, yeah. And you'll see that when the next one that we kind of bring up, I mean, it's going to be quite a few years until we have one that's in this close. And even that, this one was kind of an anomaly in its era to be that close or whatever. But yeah, and you look at the stats, and you can kind of see the argument for either one of these guys, too, which is interesting, because you kind of think of Bill Russell as this larger-than-life, dominant figure or whatever. And yeah, he's still pretty early into his career, but I mean, Dolph Schayes had a fantastic year this year as well, and just as well, I'd be fine with him as the MVP as well. With Bill Russell this year, 16.6 points, 22.7 rebounds, 2.9 assists per game, 11.3 win shares, and then a .206 win shares per 48. Schayes, he had a 24.9 points per game, 14.2 rebounds per game, 3.1 assists per game. Win shares, he had a little bit more, 13.7 win shares for him, and also win shares per 48, he did fare better, .226. Now, some other guys that shows up here, George Yardley, he had 12.3 win shares, so he was better than Russell in that respect. He also had a .208 win shares per 48, so George Yardley was better than Bill Russell in both of those statistical categories, which of course they were not looking at when they voted for this. I don't think so. Yes. That'd be quite amazing if they did, but no. But of course, yeah, no. It's just kind of a good idea to look at historically guys that did that. And we'll do that throughout this episode there. But other guy as well, Neil Johnston. He finished tied for 12th in the MVP voting, but he actually had the second best win shares per 48 that year at .224. So interesting there. A few other guys kind of pop up, a few potential contenders, but you do see why Russell and Schayes, of course, without the benefit of advanced statistics, those are very gaudy numbers on teams that were pretty good as well. So it makes total sense that those two would be the top tier guys.
Yeah, and Pettit had another strong year. He finished fourth, a pretty distant fourth, but he was right up there as well. Bob Cousy, who had won the MVP, I think Pettit won in 56 and Cousy won 57. So those are the two previous MVPs. Again, it was only the third year for that. So yeah, Schayes never actually won MVP in his career, but he was in the this was his best finish, his most shares. But he was in the top six, 3 other seasons as well, right around this time. And Russell won 5 MVPs during his career. This was, of course, his first, and then he was top 4 in MVP voting 5 other times. So in his 13-year career, he was in the top 4 in voting, or won 10 times. So that's not too bad.
Not bad at all.
Yes. So next is 1970, Willis Reed beating...
Quite a while that we have here. No disputes in the 60s. Everybody was pretty cool with the say, like, all right.
That's no protests. No protests in the 60s whatsoever.
No, exactly. Everything's the society was good. Basketball was good. Everybody was just together and just agreed upon everything in the 60s. That's the best part.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we going to do as a country? We're going to do that. And everyone's like, yeah, let's do that. Like, that'd be perfect. Like,
Well, contention struck in 1970s. Willis Reed edged Jerry West by only 41 points.
Who could forget the riots, too, man?
Yes, the Jerry West riots.
Right.
Yes, we remember them well.
Famous,
yes. These two, of course, these teams, the Lakers and the Knicks, would battle in the finals very famously in a 7-game series. There would be some heroics from Willis Reed during that time, some anguish from Jerry West as he finished second once again. And only 6 players received votes this year. Kareem this was a rookie year. He got a fair share, but was a fairly distant third. Walt Frazier also got a few votes. Billy Cunningham and Connie Hawkins as well. But yeah, I mean, these definitely were the two who had the majority, and both had excellent seasons. I think you could definitely make a very strong case for either guy.
What I like, too, about this award breakdown is every single guy that got votes got a first-place vote. So, like, one person, 2 people voted Connie Hawkins for first place. Like, 2 people voted Billy Cunningham. But everybody, I mean, those two were so far ahead of everybody else. But every single person that showed up in the list had at least one first-place vote. It was pretty unique there. But, yeah, Willis Reed, 21.7 points per game, 13.9 rebounds per game, 2.0 assists per game. He had 14.6 win shares and .227 win shares per 48. Really great numbers by his respects. He was second in MVP voting in 1969, the year prior. Then he was fourth in 1971. So this would be, of course, his crowning achievement his individual career, but he did show up a few other times there as well. As far as Jerry West, 31.2 points per game, 4.6 rebounds per game, 7.5 assists per game. A little bit better than Reed in win shares at 15.2 for West. Also a little bit better in win shares per 48. He was .234. So this is going to be interesting, though, because Walt Frazier, he finished fourth in MVP voting. And guess what? He had a higher win shares than Reed, 15, and the highest win shares per 48 among anybody to receive MVP votes, .236. Thankfully, this is the one and only time that Walt Frazier was ever overshadowed by Willis Reed. So that was that. At least Walt Frazier can go, hey, you got it this time, but the glory is usually mine, so it's okay. So.
Yes, it's worth noting that Jerry West in his career, he never won MVP. He had 8 seasons in which he had top 5 MVP finishes, including second 4 times, and he finished second a lot in his career.
Like, he just does not get his due for being just a tragic NBA figure. It's because he at least had some success. But it's just fascinating. You lose all those finals. You're always second in MVP. What a horribly tragic figure, especially for a man named Mr. Clutch. So.
Yes. Well, worked out in 72, and he's had a pretty good life. But yeah,
I would definitely take Jerry West's life. But yeah, it's definitely had he not won that title, I wonder what would be sort of the idea behind Jerry West. But I guess it was a different era too. If he was around now and always went to the finals and always lost and was always second in MVP, I cannot imagine the hot takes that would surround him. Maybe in the 70s they were a little bit smarter about he gets there every year. That's pretty cool. Oh, he's almost always in the MVP vote. He must be very good. But we're not as intelligent.
Maybe not. It's possible. We're tricked more by the fake NBA news. We manipulated by a certain segments.
I don't know. We're off.
I guess so. I guess we are. Yeah. So 1975 in the ABA, we don't actually have official ABA voting totals in Basketball Reference. This is where we're getting the voting totals, by the way. We could credit Basketball Reference for every show. Sometimes we forget, but you should always go to Basketball Reference. But there's a APBR forum thread that has some unofficial ones. So in 75, McGinnis and Erving each got 11 votes, and then Matt Calvin for Denver got 6 votes, and Bobby Jones for Denver got the remaining 2. Denver was a big surprise that year in the regular season, although they fell early in the playoffs, I believe. And the Nets did as well for Julius Erving's Nets. They lost in the second round, one of the biggest upsets in basketball history. But I mean, this is the only time in either league anyone has ever shared the MVP award. The Rookie of the Year has been shared a few times, but this is the big one. This is the only time that's ever happened. And both had great seasons. Probably McGinnis had a slightly better season, but they were both, really good. And, obviously, you could make a case for either one.
Absolutely, yeah. Erving, 27.9 points per game, 10.9 rebounds per game, 5.5 assists per game. As you mentioned, the New York Nets, he led them to 58 wins, but unfortunately they fell in the playoffs to the Spirits of St. Louis, and of course, as you said, the biggest upsets in basketball history. Erving was able to make it up, though, 1974, 1976, he won ABA MVP, and then in 1981, he did the same in the NBA. He was also top 6 in 6 other seasons as well, so Erving got his due eventually, but George McGinnis, so great year for him, and just a fun year for that Indiana Pacers team as well. So he had 29.8 points per game, 14.3 rebounds per game, 3.9 assists per game, or 6.3 assists per game, rather. But just a really great season. He led the league in points per game that year. The Pacers, they only won 45 games that year, but they made it all the way to the finals before falling to the Kentucky Colonels. So just a really good, really miraculous run there for the Pacers as well. And as far as George McGinnis, he had MVP votes in 1973, 1976, 1997, and maybe in 1974. We're not quite sure because it's hard to get records of things in the ABA. So we think so, but we don't want to say for sure because who knows. But so that was kind of the George McGinnis. So he always a reliable player, always got those MVP votes, but probably this would be the peak of his basketball career.
Yeah, I mean, he had some good years afterward in the NBA, and then he kind of fell off real young in his career. He really keyed that Pacers team in that postseason run. I mean, Slick Leonard said that that he had never seen another player have that kind of individual run. Other guys have actually might have been Slick Leonard, but maybe somebody else. But either way, a lot of the observers of the ABA were just really impressed by what he did, and the numbers bear that out as well. And obviously, he was a great player and helped them kind of continue that dynasty, but that was really the last gasp for them, and he was took them all the way to the finals. But unfortunately for them, the Colonels were a little bit too much for them.
Yeah, I think that was his last year in Indiana as well, right? Because he went over to
the Sixers. Yeah,
right. Oh, yeah, because absolutely, of course, after, and then he played with the Pacers later in his career. That's where I got mixed up. So makes sense.
He went to Denver for a little bit because he was traded for Bobby Jones, and then went to the Pacers right at the end, and then by then he had nothing left, and it was a little bit embarrassing for a situation for him being so bad for the Pacers after just a few years earlier he'd been just a tremendous player, but. But that happens sometimes, unfortunately.
Everybody gets old, Jason, except for us.
They do, yeah. So 1976, this is a really interesting MVP year. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the MVP, and he had 409 points. Bob McAdoo was second with 393, so only 16 more. And then Dave Cowens was 15 behind McAdoo at 378. So extremely close for the first place votes. I'll read them here since I think they're interesting. Kareem had 52, McAdoo had 47, and Cowens actually had one more at 48. So very, very close. I think in terms of the three players, this is definitely the closest MVP situation. And the Lakers were they were, I believe, 40 and 42 that season. So they were. This was his first year in LA. So for him to win the MVP, and this was his fourth MVP, so he was certainly used to that, and he put up brilliant numbers. But there's been a lot made of the fact that MVP does not go to teams with winning records, and that's almost with not above 50-55 wins. And that's almost always true now, but it was not true then. And Cowens, the Celtics won the championship this year, and McAdoo, the Braves, they had a deep playoff run as well. So it was just interesting interesting to see the result there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's become a thing now where, like, because for a while it'd be like, guys would make the playoffs or whatever, but not, maybe not get maybe be 500, a little under 500, and people would still maybe vote for them for MVP. But you're getting people that like aren't quite sure if Russell Westbrook deserves MVP. His team's like 11 games over 500. You know what I mean? Like they're like really good. They're like a 6 seed, but it's like I don't know if he's winning enough to win the. Like it's become a thing now where you got to be like the best player on the best team or near the best player or the best player on nearly the best team or whatever. So it's pretty unique here that Kareem was able to kind of buck that trend and get up there. But when your numbers are so overwhelmingly good, it does. And we'll see how it bears out this year with Russell Westbrook as well, because he's going to be very, very similar to Kareem in respect.
Yeah. So Kareem in his career won MVP 6 times, and then he was in the top 5 in MVP voting 9 other times.
Good.
Good. And then in the seasons he did not win MVP, he was first in either PER, win shares per 48, or box score plus minus, or all 3 on 5 other occasions. So you could make a good case for him winning 11 MVPs in his career. Just in like where he like absolutely like led in those categories. I mean, if you consider like being top 3 or being like among them,
right.
There's probably other years he could have been MVP too. I mean, just
right.
That level of quality for that many times is just pretty mind blowing. Yeah, and Cowens had he was the 73 MVP, and he had 2 other top 3 finishes in his career, which I didn't realize. And McAdoo was a 75 MVP, which I think that was definitely a year where he probably deserved over Kareem, although Kareem was still great. And he was second in 74 and 76. I hadn't realized he was quite at that level, during that entire run. I kind of thought 75 was like a much higher elevation than the rest of the time, but that's not, he had a really good stretch there, and I was always a great scorer even later when some of the other stuff fell off. But yeah, I mean, this was a pretty exceptional, like I said, pretty exceptional, almost unparalleled for 3 guys to be this close. And this is definitely a year where I think we're going to have something similar to that, maybe even 4 guys. I think I might think a little more of LeBron's chances than you do in the MVP race, but we'll kind of see how that goes.
Yeah, I wish. I mean, I think he has all rights to be up there, but I just don't know if because I think a lot of the MVP too becomes like the story of the year, and I don't know that LeBron. I mean, what LeBron's doing, what the Cavs are doing, is basically just like old hat now at this point. You know what I mean? Like, all right, LeBron's great and the team's good. So I just don't know if he's going to get as many of those narrative votes, or the people that are like, well, what's the story of the year? And the story of the year is probably not LeBron yet. Like in the playoffs, it might be, but right now, I don't know. But yeah, we'll see. I hope he's up there because I think he absolutely deserves to be up there. I'm sort of, if I was a betting man, I don't know that he's going to be in the top 3 there or real close to the top 3, even if he is 4th. But yeah, this year is really unique because so you got the stats, and I'm not going to read all the stats here, but one thing that I did really like, though, is that the top 3 in the MVP votes were also the top 3 in win shares. So it's one of those rare years where it's like they got it right. I mean, those guys were so clearly the top 3 players. Win shares per 48 holds up pretty well. John Drew slips in there at second highest at .216 win shares per 48. Fred Brown, he's got the 4th highest win shares per 48 at .167, and he finishes 13th in the MVP voting. But for the most part, the advanced stats bear out that these 3 guys are your best players in the league. So that's unique because we will see a lot of times we're coming up, especially in these close races, where one of the guys falls completely off or is nowhere near. But this is pretty good, and yeah, you can't really beat these 3 guys in this particular year too. I mean, these are really, really gaudy numbers from all these guys.
Not the win shares at the end or the end all be all or anything, but they're a decent like guideline as far as what the thing that I want anybody our advanced stats friends to
we don't live and die by win shares. Just
there's a lot of they're sort of an easy shorthand for discussions like this. There's obviously other depths, and we can do the stats too, but it's just worth noting. So I know maybe some of our advanced stats friends might be cringing at using win shares and endorsing it so much. We want to give a little bit of a guarded feeling about that before we move on. But yeah, 1981, it was the first year for media voting, and Julius Erving edged Larry Bird. Very, very close race there, and he won by just a 31 points. So he had Erving had 28 first place votes, and Bird had 20 first place votes. And this was only Bird's second season. These 2 teams, of course, were already in the midst of tough playoff battles, and the Celtics would get the edge in the playoffs. Not that would have any bearing on this MVP vote, but it's interesting because it looks like numbers wise, Erving's case was quite a bit stronger than Bird's.
Yes, so Erving, 24.6 points per game, 8.0 rebounds per game, 4.4 assists per game. But here's where he really was above him. Win shares, 13.8 win shares. Win shares per 48, 0.231 win shares per 48 for Erving. Bird, on the other hand, the normal kind of counting stats, he holds up pretty well. 21.2 points per game, 10.9 rebounds per game, 5.5 assists per game. So he's neck and neck with Julius there. Unfortunately, on the other things, win shares, 10.8 win shares for Larry Bird. And this really hurts. 0.160 win shares per 48 for Larry Bird this year, which uniquely though, so we'll kind of break down both those numbers. Larry Bird, he was 8th total in win shares that season. Kareem was first, Erving, Moses Malone, Adrian Dantley, Artis Gilmore, Marcus Johnson, and even teammate Robert Parrish were all higher than Bird that year, which is crazy. Then worse yet, Bird was 13th in win shares for 48 this season. 13th. Above him was Erving, Kareem, Parrish, Magic Johnson, Bobby Jones, Johnson, Gilmore, Malone, Dantley, Bob Lanier, George Gervin, and James Silas, all over Larry Bird in win shares per 48 that year. Yeah. And as you sort of mentioned or alluded to a little bit earlier, Kareem, had a chance at a lot of other MVPs or a legit case for these, and I think he got absolutely screwed this year because he's tops in the league in win shares. He's second in win shares per 48. The Lakers won 57 games, and then the NBA Finals. Like, what?
Yeah, and no, they didn't win the finals. They won the finals in 80. Yeah, or no, they didn't get in 81. They got there in it was the Celtics and Rockets in 81. This was
right.
They were upset.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
Not that had any bearing on it anyway, but yes. But for the record, you definitely. I mean, 26.2 points, 10.3 rebounds. All that stuff as well. I mean, I think it was Erving's year. I really do. I mean, he kind of had the shackles taken off of him a little bit and was able to kind of be a little more like the old Dr. J. You kind of playing that style. He'd kind of been more blending in with other guys, and it became a little bit more of his team, and kind of run around him at this time. But Kareem was absolutely up there, and Bird had a very good season. I mean, those numbers are still really good. They're just not. They looking at it from the perspective we have now, they definitely seem, a tier below what Erving and Kareem and other guys were doing. But Bird obviously would get there, just within a few years. He would eventually win 3 MVPs and finish in the top 5 of the times, including 81. So it was 5 times total. So that's obviously really impressive for his career. And he absolutely was, I think, during that time when he won MVP, I think he was very much, I think he was clearly the best player in the game. I mean, Magic was close, and there's other guys who, you could throw in there as you're thinking about, but he definitely elevated that level just a little bit premature, at least according to looking at some of these measurements that we like to use.
Absolutely.
So 1990, another controversial, another good a 3-way one. Magic Johnson beating Charles Barkley and Michael Jordan. Barkley actually finished second. Johnson was ahead by 22 points, even though Barkley won more first place votes and a lot more first place votes actually. 38-27. Michael Jordan was third with 21 first place votes, and he finished about 70 points behind Magic there. So that's a really interesting vote total, and honestly, like, the case for all 3 guys is really really close. So that's a hard one to make, even if you're looking at some of the numbers that we look at now that they didn't have then.
Absolutely, yeah. And what's also unique about this year as well, 7 players received first place votes. So you had Magic, Barkley, and MJ, of course. You also had Karl Malone, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, and Hakeem Olajuwon all receiving votes here. But you look at the cases of all these guys, and it's pretty tough. I mean, it's very similar to what we got going on this year. Magic, 22.3 points per game, 6.6 rebounds per game, 11.5 assists per game, 16.5 win shares, 0.270 win shares per 48. This would be, of course, Magic Johnson's third and final MVP. He was also top 3 6 different times in his career, so a good little resume there for him. As far as Charles Barkley this year, though, 25.2 points per game, 11.5 rebounds per game, 3.9 assists per game, 17.3 win shares, so he beat Magic a little bit in there, and then a 0.269 win shares per 48, so a little bit lower than Magic Johnson, actually, 0.001 lower than Magic Johnson win shares per 48, so very close there. But Barkley, obviously he didn't win this time, but he would win MVP in 1993 and finished top 6 other times as well. So again, a great little resume there. And then there's Michael Jordan, of course, 33.6 points per game, 6.9 rebounds per game, and 6.6 assists per game. So the counting stats really love him. The advanced ones do too. 19 win shares and then a 0.285 win shares per 48. So definitely, from a statistical standpoint, if you want to put Michael Jordan as your MVP, that you could definitely do that. But either way, any one of those guys I think works pretty well. And what's unique about this one too is everything holds up perfect. I mean, the top three in win shares that year are Magic, MJ, Barkley, and Magic. So it's in reverse, inverse, in different order, but it's still those three guys. And then win shares per 48 has the same top three as well. MJ is tops in the league, but then you have Magic and Barkley right behind him. So it like the top. I mean, those are whether you put Magic first or Barkley first or MJ first, like you pretty much very similar to how I think it's gonna be this year. Like there's no bad argument for any of those guys because those are just no doubt the three best players in the league on this given year.
And he'd already won the MVP Jordan had in '88, and he would win it 4 other times, and then finish in the top 5 other times. So, and in his non-MVP seasons, he was first in either PER, win shares per 48, or box score plus minus, or all three in 5 other seasons beyond the MVP ones. So you could make a case for him winning, 10 MVPs in his career, and certainly this is one where you could make the case. But the other guys, it's up there too. I mean, this is right on the threshold of when Jordan, is probably he's already the greatest. He's already the best player in the game. He's probably been that for a couple years. But Magic, he's still holding on. The Lakers are generally a better team, and Magic's doing some great things, and Barkley was kind of threatening that as well, and some other guys. But it would obviously be clear in another year or two once the Bulls were a championship level team that Jordan was number one. But there's still the kind of that underlying questions of a feeling like is he too much is he too much of a scorer, which is kind of a silly thing to think, but that was the reputation at the time anyway.
No, it never was. He was a winner from the moment he came in the league, and he was a winner when he left. So that's all I've heard. So that's all I will hear, Jason.
There you go. Fair enough. So 1997, Karl Malone beating Michael Jordan, one of those years in which you definitely could have made a case for Jordan. These two players would win a battle, of course, in the finals, in which Jordan won that battle handily, as he generally did in the finals. This was very much a two-man race. Between Jordan and Malone, and honestly, this is sort of seen as like kind of a silly vote, but honestly, I think it's pretty. I think you could make a case for either one. I don't think it's a bad case. I think maybe Jordan has a slightly better case, but it's very, very close. And I can understand like rewarding Malone for the Jazz were having a pretty great season, and I'm not saying you necessarily favor a guy who hasn't won it before, but like I don't think it was just purely okay. We're sick of playing voting for Jordan.
It's not as egregious as kind of the narrative would let you believe, where it's just like, well, I'm so bored of voting for MJ. I guess Karl. It's like, no, Karl had like a great year, and the Jazz, kind of reemerging as a powerhouse in the West as well. I mean, it coincided with just an awesome year from Karl Malone. 27.4 points per game, 9.9 rebounds per game, 4.5 assists per game. He had 16.7 win shares and a 0.68 win shares per 48. You contrast that to Michael Jordan, 29.6 points per game, 5.9 rebounds per game, 4.3 assists per game. Jordan edges him slightly in win shares, 18.3, and again slightly in win shares per 48 at 0.283. But it's not like a ridiculous like an ungodly idea that these guys would be here. It's just it's fine. I mean, Karl Malone was a great pick this year. I mean, it's Jordan probably does have a better case, but the narrative has it that like they just needed somebody else, so they just okay, fine, I guess Karl Malone, and it's just not true at all. But what's interesting though, win shares per the win shares total for the league, the top three hold up. Jordan was number 1, Karl Malone was number 2, and then Grant Hill was number 3. So and that was the top 3 of the MVP voting that year as well. So works pretty well. Win shares per 48. Interestingly enough, it's Jordan, Malone, and then Malone's teammate John Stockton. Yes, John Stockton. He finished 15th in MVP voting that year, but was 3rd in win shares per 48 at 0.226. So good old reliable John Stockton. So yeah, I mean that shows you just how awesome that Jazz team was at in this year or whatever. So I'm fine with them winning, getting representation there, because I think it was a really cool story as well from kind of a reemerging in a way. I mean, they didn't go away really, but like they were a powerhouse in the early 90s, and it seemed like they were knocking on the door, and then it kind of wasn't quite there, and then they just kind of come right back in the late 90s and really just do some great stuff and go to, of course, back-to-back NBA Finals.
Right. Malone, in addition to the 2 MVP years, he also had 7 other top 5 seasons in MVP voting. So he was he was knocking on the door for a long time for that. It's kind of easy to forget that, because he's another guy who was so excellent for so long and isn't necessarily thought of, like in the same way as like, okay, he was ever, like the best player in the league. And, granted, Jordan was, he played while Michael Jordan played. So it's hard to, break that. But he was definitely up there, and he's maybe people maybe don't like him for other reasons, and so I think maybe there's a lack of appreciation for just like how like immensely good he was. And some of it, he didn't do. He had some issues with playing particularly well in a couple of those finals. He not coming through in key moments and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, that's overstated. I think he was just amazingly great for a really long time, very deep into his career. A rare, on the very small list of guys who were amazing till age 40. So that's worth something right there.
Yeah, I think he's got something like 14. I don't have it in front of me, like 14 times where he was like top 10 in MVP voting, or at least got 12 or so times he had MVP shares. I mean, the numbers are obnoxious. Like he was just always there, pretty much from 1986 until early 2000s. He was in the MVP race, one way or another. So that's it's pretty egregious sometimes when he doesn't get the love that he deserves. So. But
speaking of Karl, there's a second MVP race in 1999 where he edged Alonzo, Mourning, and Tim Duncan. He beat Mourning by about 50 votes and Duncan by about 87 votes, I believe. So it wasn't absolutely it wasn't quite as close to some of these races, but it was definitely interesting. Where there were three really strong candidates, and Shaq honestly had a pretty strong case as well, and finished well below these other guys, but. But yeah, it was another interesting one to look at as well.
Yeah, there was 16 players receiving MVP votes this year, so it was a wide open field. 6 received first place votes, of course. Malone, Mourning, and Duncan all did, but also Allen Iverson, Jason Kidd, and Shaq also received votes. I did find this interesting as well. Duncan, Iverson, and Kidd were all under 25 years old at this point, and Shaq was only 26, so you could see all those guys would sort of take the next decade and still be very good into that next decade, but you do still have the older guys, like your Karl Malones or whatever, who are still, still presiding over this, still win the MVP, but you can sort of see the next generation of the NBA sort of forming underneath them here, particularly in this MVP race. As far as numbers-wise, I'll just kind of do the advanced ones here. Karl Malone, 9.6 win shares. Of course, you're going to notice lower win shares. This is the lockout shortened season, so the overall win share is going to be a little bit lower, but win shares per 48, those are obviously regulated, so it'll stay the same, but that's .252 for Karl Malone. Alonzo Mourning, he had 7.9 win shares and a .216 win shares per 48. Then Tim Duncan had 8.7 win shares and then .213 win shares per 48. Shaq was second in win shares, but he finished 6th in the MVP voting. David Robinson finished 12th in the MVP voting, but he was actually 4th in win shares, so you get those guys as well. David Robinson, who's long well known as a win shares per 48 guy, a guy that's just like, you look at the leaderboards, win shares per 48. It's like him and Chris Paul are like the guys that are just like dominant figures in the win shares per 48. Of course, this year Robinson led the league in that category. Shaq came in second, and then it was followed by the 1, 2, 3 in MVP voting. So for the most part, they got it pretty right. But yeah, you can make a case for Shaq for sure being in there, and maybe a small case for David Robinson as well to get a little bit more love in here. But that top 3 is not bad, and Malone definitely works as an MVP here. This is yet another one where people kind of poo-poo it a little bit, but I think it's a solid season for him, and I think he's a good pick.
Yeah, and this, as you kind of were talking about, this is Malone was the oldest MVP in history, I believe, this season, and he was the last, really of that last time anybody in that generation, anybody who was drafted in the '80s, won an MVP, I believe. So that it really was kind of an end of an era there as you're moving on to the 2000s and all this, younger generation of guys who are in their, early to mid 20s are, about to take the league over.
Yeah, I always find it funny that like Jason Kidd's like still so young in 1999. I feel like he came in the league in like 1992. You know what I mean? Like I always have this idea that he was just kind of around for more of the 90s than he really was. But a little fun fact about this year, Malone's Utah Jazz were upset in the second round by the Portland Trailblazers. This is a wild playoffs too, where seeding was all over the place. So you had upsets and the 8 seed Knicks in the final, all this stuff going on. So the Jazz were upset in the second round by the Portland Trailblazers. The Jazz were no longer in the playoffs, of course, so the NBA wanted to fly Malone out to New York City to pick up his award on NBC television, and Malone refused and said, "I'm not doing it." He's probably driving his truck somewhere. Didn't want to go to New York. So, but it was interesting because I think Alonzo Mourning, I think that he got knocked out pretty early as well. So it was like a thing, usually when you give the guys the MVP, they're still in the playoffs, but like none of their guys were still in the playoffs. So they just, I don't know if like they ever showed something where they're getting their awards or if Malone just did, press in Utah or something like that. But yeah, really interesting season. But that's just a wild season, that 1999 as well. The playoffs are just a mess.
Yes. Yeah. Although the Blazers, it was, they were the lower seed, but they actually were like only 2 games worse in the standings.
Yeah, and that's why the seeds are so crazy, because you're like, oh, they got upset. And it's like, well, all these teams were just like this blob of teams. It was so impossible to know who was really like, the good or the bad. Everybody was kind of in a blob, and especially, like you said, Portland was great. And the Knicks showed that too. They were the 8th seed, but it was like, they were like a handful of games away from being like the 2 seed or something. So it was a wild sense. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you only have 50 games and, and they were a weird team that kind of gelled toward the end, but, interesting one. Tim Duncan, however, who finished 3rd in MVP voting, definitely showed up in the playoffs that year. And speaking of Duncan, 2002 MVP race, another close one, 57 points between Duncan and Jason Kidd. And this is another one where, the 6 guys got first place votes here was Duncan, Kidd, Shaquille O'Neal, Tracy McGrady, Kobe Bryant, and Gary Payton of all people. Still, still playing well, although by 2002, I'm not sure that he was necessarily.
I bet that was a Seattle beat reporter. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, like, either his mother or a beat reporter in Seattle. So that's the only... I like Gary, but there's going to be a really egregious MVP vote coming up here in a little bit. But go on.
Okay, we'll enjoy that one. But yeah. So, but this is another one where, I think Duncan, you'll talk about it, but I think, Kidd, because he's interesting to look at numbers wise, because, you could definitely see the effect that he had on the Nets and how they helped, and I think he was really important in turning them around. But if you kind of compare the numbers and look at the advanced numbers, it's clearly it seemed like Duncan and Shaq were really the 2 strongest candidates this year, and Kidd on that level just didn't necessarily belong in the conversation. But you look at some of the other components that are considered, and I certainly see why there were a lot of votes for Kidd, but I would probably think like with that gap in these numbers, I would think Duncan would have definitely been the right choice.
Yeah, and Kidd was absolutely one of those stories where the story and the narrative of the year definitely helped that guy out. Obviously he didn't win it, but he got right up there because of that. Because he comes to the Nets and almost immediately they find success. They jettison Stephon Marbury out of there. He goes there, and the Nets emerges as a powerhouse in a very weak East. But still, you can only do what you can do, and that's his conference. And that still gets credit for spearheading that team and spearheading them to the NBA Finals and having a great season. But yeah, when you look at the numbers, Tim Duncan, 25.5 points per game, 12.7 rebounds per game, 3.7 assists per game. The advanced ones, though, he just destroys Jason Kidd. 17.8 win shares and 0.257 win shares per 48. Jason Kidd, 14.7 points per game, 7.3 rebounds per game, 9.9 assists per game. So a very Jason Kidd-y, stat line there. Win shares, 8.9, not good. And then 0.140 win shares per 48 for Jason Kidd. So not great. He's 13th in win shares overall and 17th in win shares per 48. That's not great. Duncan, he's tops in the league in win shares. Second, Elton Brand, actually, but he tied for 16th in MVP voting. Dirk Nowitzki, he came in 3rd for win shares, but finished 8th in MVP voting. Shaq, he finished 3rd in MVP voting, but he was tops in win shares per 48. And Tim Duncan, who of course won the MVP, he was 2nd in win shares per 48. So a lot of good choices there. Not any of them really Jason Kidd, but I get it. You understand. And I remember at the year too, it seemed like he was a decent pick too. And we're going to have another guy again where it tends to be particularly with point guards. It definitely helped in this era as well. But you go to a team that wasn't good, and all of a sudden they get good. It's like it's not all their credit, but it's easy to kind of tell the story that they were the key cog in that. In both cases, they absolutely were, because Jason Kidd, rightfully so, did deserve a lot of credit for the Nets emerging in the East, and the guy we're going to talk about here in a little bit, he deserved credit as well. But yeah, when you look at the numbers, it doesn't quite work. But the most egregious votes of this entire MVP voting season, Michael Jordan. Yes, Wizards Michael Jordan got 16 MVP votes.
Yeah, well, points.
They weren't most valuable player. He didn't get first place votes, but yeah, he got points. Right. Despite the fact that he had a 3.3 win shares and a 0.075 win shares per 48. So speaking of beat writers giving votes that they shouldn't, that's bad. He did not.
Well, the Wizards had such an outstanding season that you should reward him for that. Yeah,
he picked Kwame Brown up, and him and Richard Hammond, and they just said, hey, we're going to do this. But yeah, come on, guys, that's really bad.
Come on, guys, come on, the voters who voted for Michael Jordan who are listening to this right now.
Yeah, all you that always
don't do that.
I want to shame you.
Yeah.
How does Peja Stojakovic had so much of a better year, and he gets, one MVP point.
Yeah.
Maybe got on there. I think there's 7 Sacramento Kings that got points in the season too.
Yeah. It's hard to pick just one.
Turkoglu gets one. No, I think Peja, Bibby, and Chris Webber all got it. Just a lot of people getting points here, but Michael Jordan should not have been at all. But
sure. Yeah. Kidd was also 5th in MVP voting at one point. And Duncan, he won this MVP, 2003 MVP, and also had 7 other top 5 finishes in his career. So you could definitely have made the case for him in 01 and 04 as well as the 02 and 03 one. So Tim Duncan, pretty good is what we're saying. And the last race that we're going to look at is Steve Nash's first MVP in 2005, a slim victory over Shaquille O'Neal. And this was another situation like you talked about where Nash came to the Suns in free agency from the Mavericks and was certainly a good player for the Mavericks, but never considered an exceptional one. And that all changed when he went to Phoenix and helped inspire a turnaround there. But the vote was extremely close. It was 34 points between the two, with Nash winning, of course. And honestly, the numbers here, it's not I think there's definitely a strong case for Nash. It's more the second MVP where I think that he goes a little bit astray. So I think statistically and narrative wise, I think Nash has a pretty good case here. You can certainly make the case for Shaq as well, and him going to Miami and helping inspire them to be a really good team as well. So either way, and there are other guys, Dirk and Duncan and some other guys, even LeBron, although he was still very early on in his career, but he was producing really well. So it's not like I don't think Nash was certainly a bad choice. It's the numbers wise, it's a little bit different for than Kidd, getting second in 02.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm right with you. I think that the 2006 one, which we're not going to talk about because it wasn't all that close, but that one is really egregious because you have LeBron who just had an incredible year as well, and a few other guys as well. And that one just does not really work all that well for Nash. But this year as well, 15.5 points per game for Nash, 3.3 rebounds per game, 11.5 assists per game, 10.9 win shares, 0.203 win shares per 48. Now Shaq again very close here, 22.9 points per game, 10.4 rebounds per game, 2.7 assists per game, 11 win shares, and 0.211 win shares per 48. So not a huge, giant, egregious difference between those two. So I'm okay with that. The top 3 win shares players, though, they finished 11th, 3rd, and tied for 9th. So you actually have a case that neither of these guys, if you really wanted to do it, should have won. KG was 1st in the league in win shares that year. Dirk was 2nd. And ironically enough, Nash's teammate Amari Stoudemire was 3rd in win shares for the total that season. And he did receive a first-place vote as well. Nash, he was 11th in win shares, and Shaq was 9th. Shaq's teammate, actually, Dwayne Wade, tied Shaq in win shares. So you actually have a legit case that, both of their teammates had better, arguable, either better or at least arguable cases for the MVP, just as well as Nash and Shaq did. So it's a very unique situation here. Win shares per 48, top 3, they feature both KG and Dirk, and then Tim Duncan slid into 3rd. Tim Duncan, though, finished 4th in MVP voting. So yeah, really interesting here where the big argument is about Shaq and Nash, and it's I don't know, KG's got a really good case too, and a lot of these other guys too, like Amari, it's pretty amazing too from a advanced stat standpoint as well. But narrative wise and story wise, it was between Nash and Shaq largely, and Nash in particular just dominated that in his cases. They were the story of that season, and sometimes that is what it takes. There's this one wasn't up there, but it probably could have been the Derrick Rose year in 2011. A guy again, statistically not probably not the MVP, but narrative wise and story wise, that he was quote unquote the story of the year, and sometimes that's what the MVP is.
So Shaq had his quote here was after learning that he did not win, "I got one. It was cool." So apparently Shaq's okay with that. He did have 7 other top 6 MVP finishes in his career, including 2nd in 1995, and you could really make very strong MVP cases for him in 99, 2001, 2002. So, he only won it in the year 2000, which it was clearly his best season, although he had some excellent ones as well. But, a lot of that time, of course, he was not necessarily as good as a regular season, and then he would turn on during the playoffs, especially during those Lakers championship years. Yeah, and Nash, we talked about the 06 one where he won by more than 200 points over LeBron. Dirk also was awesome that year. Kobe had a really strong year that year. Chauncey Billups actually, and Dwayne Wade also had really strong years. So that was a year where there wasn't necessarily a consensus choice. And I understand at least the thinking there where, they lost to Mare and they were almost as good, with Nash. So I at least get what they were. I don't agree with it, but at least get what they were going through. Sure. I don't feel like it's like terrible. But the 07, he was second in the MVP voting to Dirk in 2007. He lost, only by just over 100 points.
Yeah,
so
I didn't know that at all. I mean, when you put that in my notes, I was like, oh yeah, like I really don't remember him being that close there. I felt like Dirk just kind of ran away with that award that year. So that's crazy. I did not think of that. Yeah, he had 44 first place votes as well. So
yeah, and then never really again was really a MVP level candidate, but for those 3 years, absolutely. I mean, and he was obviously a great player for a long time and did some fantastic things. But yeah, I mean, I think with Nash and Kidd, I mean, you can see tangibly a certain way. You can see what they do by the way they move the ball, the way they get teammates involved, stuff, point guard stuff, the way that they're great at. So I think it's easier to look beyond the stats for those guys and see some tangible things where you're playing other positions. I mean, you can definitely see individual greatness, but as far as like how you affect your teammates, sometimes that can be harder to see. And I think the point guards definitely get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to that.
Yeah, particularly in Nash. I mean, Nash held the ball on every possession. You know what I mean? Like that was the thing that made everything go. Like, you know what I mean? Like he was always in the middle of the play. He was always either passing the guy or it's so easy and it's so in your face that it's hard to avoid his contributions as well. And then when that team kind of emerges out of nowhere and he's one of the key cog in them emerging out of nowhere and becoming a great team. I mean, yeah, it's hard not to kind of reward him in some way, with the votes or whatever. So I definitely get it, but and it's not as egregious as some people say. I mean, maybe the second one, but Nash was still a very good player at the point as well. So it's not like we're really putting him down. I think the Kidd one's pretty egregious, but that worked out with the story as well. So I do get that one.
And Kidd didn't win either, so
exactly
so
right. So
a little bit less, yeah. So. All right, Rich. Well, anything else we have to say about this category? I think we've exhausted it fairly reasonably well.
I was going to say though, Jason. No matter we talked about all these MVPs, but let's be honest. You're the real MVP.
Oh, Rich,
yeah.
That's
I was going to leave the show off with that, and then you started talking, and I didn't want to interrupt you. So
I
was like, no, he's the
there you go.
Okay.
Yeah,
and then we got too busy, and you were talking about Dolph Schayes, and I didn't want to ruin that. So I just wanted to tell you that. So
well, I appreciate you. You're the real MVP for waiting for the perfect time to say that. So.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Like Jason Kidd, though, I time it perfectly.
Exactly. Hey, you're getting the points. So, all right, everyone.
Please never compare me to Jason Kidd ever again.
Okay,
that made me feel like you just thinking about that. So.
Fair enough. It's be excised from the record.
Thank you.
So.
Okay.
All right. So thanks, everyone, for checking us out. You can find us at thestepback@fansided.com. And you can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can follow us on Twitter or Facebook at Over and Back NBA. So thanks for listening, and we're back again soon.